Good evening and welcome to tonight's Community Now. I'm Keisha Morant Williams, a board member of the YWCA Lancaster, where our mission is to eliminate racism, empower and empower women. Tonight, we'll continue our work of listening and reflecting as we delve into this deeply necessary conversation. This evening's topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, is one of great significance and one that's gained a lot of attention in recent months. We have a few slides that we'd like to go through that give us some of the framework of how we at the YWCA define and unpack these terms. Jasmine, if you could share those slides for us. Okay, so first up, we have diversity. According to the YWCA's website, diversity includes all of the ways in which people differ, encompassing the different characteristics that make one individual or group different from another. While diversity is often used in reference to race and ethnicity and gender, we embrace a broader definition of diversity that also includes age, national origin, religion, disability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, marital status, language, and physical appearance. This definition includes diversity of thought, so including ideals, perspectives, and values, recognizing that individuals affiliate with multiple identities. Next, we'd like to talk a little bit about how the Y defines equity. Equity is the fair treatment, access, and opportunity and advancement for all people, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. Improving equity involves increasing justice and fairness without the procedures and processes of institutions or systems, as well as in their distribution of resources. Tackling equity issues requires an understanding of the root cause of outcome disparities within our society. And then finally, we'll discuss inclusion. Inclusion is the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. An inclusive and welcoming climate embraces differences and offers respect in words and actions for all people. It's important to note that while an inclusive group is by definition, a diverse group isn't always inclusive. Increasing the recognition of unconscious, of implicit bias helps us to be deliberate about addressing issues of inclusivity, right? So we thought that it was important for us to begin with those definitions, the framework of how the YWCA defines those terms, because sometimes it's challenging to even have these conversations if we don't have that framework in place. Just a few days ago, President Biden signed a number of executive orders that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And tonight, we'd like to continue that conversation. We have three wonderful panelists with us with different backgrounds and perspectives who have very generously agreed to share their expertise with us and help us to reflect on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Thank you all. So now I'll introduce each of our panelists and then we'll jump right into the discussion. First up, we have Barbara J. Wilson. Barbara is the Executive Director of the Lancaster City Housing Authority, where the mission is to improve the quality of life consistent with local, Commonwealth, and federal statutes. She served as a member of the Lancaster City Council from 2011 to 2017, and in 2017, she was the Vice President of the Council. Barbara's past experiences include her position as Associate Director of Auxiliary Services with Franklin and Marshall College and the HUD Certified Property Manager for the Housing Development Corporation. Barbara shares her expertise by serving on many boards and committees, including the Community Action Partnership Board, the Lancaster Equity Partnership Board, the YWCA Property Committee, and many others. She describes her current position as the best of both worlds. She's constantly looking for ways to enrich the lives of the residents and clients they serve. Not just by making sure that we are providing housing, but also in working with them in overall living. Next, we have State Representative Brian K. Sims. Brian is a distinguished policy attorney and civil rights advocate from Center City, Philadelphia. He is dedicated to making safer communities, strengthening and protecting public education, preserving service for seniors and other vulnerable Pennsylvanians, making affordable health care more available, expanding civil rights for all Pennsylvanians, preserving our environment while investing in alternative energy and creating jobs. During his time at the Bar Association, Brian worked with attorneys, legislators, and community organizers on issues ranging from gender and pay inequity to environmental regulations. A member of the National Campaign Board of the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund until August 2011, Brian lectures regularly about the policy and legal challenges facing the LGBT civil rights movement and is a regular lecturer at the Center for Progressive Leadership. He is the first out LGBT member of the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and today he continues to serve on the GLSEN Sports Advisory Council and is a contributor to the Advocate magazine and has written for many, many, many publications. Finally, we have Aisha Noor. Aisha is a sought-after speaker and facilitator of equity and inclusion. Aisha not only brings professional expertise, but also her lived experiences and community volunteer work that demonstrates her dedication to lift up underrepresented and marginalized voices. As head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Giant Company, she is responsible for strategizing DEI initiatives to build a culture of inclusion and belonging across all aspects of the organizational work, and also supports communities in equitable ways. A social justice advocate and passionate about women's empowerment, she also serves on several nonprofit boards and committees to bridge the gap and help form inclusive policies and practices. As a servant leader, passionately serving our shared communities, Aisha has also received several recognitions acknowledging her work and efforts in making a positive impact in the region. So thank you all again for participating with us this evening. I am so excited. We have such an amazing group of folks with us. And so to our audience, as we proceed, you are invited to ask questions or share comments using the chat function. My colleague Jasmine King is managing this system and we'll make sure that we do save some time for your questions throughout this evening's presentation. So we're going to jump right in and get started. The first question I'm going to put out there, I would like everyone to take a stab at answering. And this is just, please tell us about your role and how it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if we could answer in the order that I introduced you for this first round, that'd be wonderful. So Barbara Wilson, you're up.
Thank you, Keisha. Thank you for having me. In my role with housing, I think that housing, even before you get to the workplace, if you don't have a stable foundation to start with, which is your housing, your home, then it doesn't matter what happens in the workplace if you're not based there to get to that next level. So in my position, I think we house so many different people and we house marginalized people economically, that if you work here at the LCHA, you have to be a person who is not biased. You have to be a person who doesn't come with preconceived any ideas about people, because we serve all types of people. And when I say that, I mean seniors, people with mental disabilities, people with physical disabilities, people of all ethnic races and backgrounds and creeds. And so we have to be open and we have to be ready to serve those people. Otherwise, you know, we can't build that foundation for those residents and clients to be able to go out into the world and be a part of society, whether they're working or not. So I think that's our part to play in diversity and inclusion within this realm.
Okay, thank you so much. Brian?
Hi, Keisha, and thank you. I really actually, I like very much the way that Ms. Wilson framed that by way of service. I suppose the way that as a civil rights attorney, as a legislator, perhaps more than almost in any other capacity in my life, having the opportunity to impact the actual law and policy as it affects discrimination. This is Pennsylvania, a state that is terrible about racial and ethnic discrimination, terrible about women's and reproductive rights, non-existent LGBTQ civil rights. And so, despite being a Commonwealth, a state that we all love, a state where the sort of rules of representative democracy were first written, the birthplace of modern sort of American civil rights, there is still a huge disconnect between the heritage and the sort of contemporary nature of these things. And so for me, I right out the gate when I was first elected, among the first pieces of legislation that I introduced were the Equal Pay Act. We still don't pay women what we are supposed to pay women in the Commonwealth or anywhere else in the United States. We know why we don't. It's not particularly progressive, frankly, to put in place legislation that fixes that. It was among the first pieces of legislation that JFK introduced and the first piece of legislation that Barack Obama introduced, the Lilly Ledbetter Act. And it's silly that pay inequity, for example, is still a part of the everyday experience of every single working woman in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. For me, I've been trying to amend the state's Human Relations Act for the better part of my adult life to include sexual orientation and gender identity. But, frankly, working towards raising the minimum wage, working towards limiting student debt, all of those things have a really dramatic impact on marginalized communities. So therefore, they are issues of equality and conversely inequality. And it's amazing. There are people that will try to lump these issues all together because they are issues that impact marginalized people, even though they impact everybody else. But I'm fond of saying that raising the minimum wage is as much an issue for LGBTQ families as the ability to go to work safely. What's the point of being able to go to work safely if you can't rent a home safely, or if you can't order food at a restaurant? What difference does it matter if you're able to get an education, which you might not be able to get, or get insurance? It's all tied to, it's all the when and how we let people succeed on their own and remove barriers from letting them do it. And there's a long way to go.
Thank you. Aisha.
Well, thank you, Dr. Keisha, and thank you, YWCA, for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation. So as you said, I'm responsible for diversity, equity, inclusion at the Giant Company, and also bringing my own passion of serving our communities and creating that culture of belonging for all of our team members and customers and neighbors, to make sure that everyone feels valued and respected and heard and welcome just the way they are. At the Giant Company, we take pride in connecting families for a better future. And my responsibility is also making sure that when we're saying that, we're including all of our families, right? And the diversity, equity, inclusion, and so many times it's kind of seen as a optional side dish, on the side that is good to have. If you don't have it, that's okay. But my way of looking at it, and as a company, what we are trying to do is really integrate diversity, equity, inclusion in everything we do. It's not something additional, but it's how we look at the thing. It's how we perceive things, our policies and procedures and the practices. So just making sure that it's really integrated in all of that, and we are being inclusive. And the Giant Company, from its humble beginning of a two-person shop in 1923 to now serving in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia, having nearly 190 stores, it really puts us in a unique position, and also puts the responsibility to being actively involved in using our space and the impact and privilege to be a partner in creating that more inclusive culture, not just for our team members and customers, but to also be a partner in the community. So happy to be part of that.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for your comments and your answers as we transition into some of the other elements of this conversation. So one of the things that we hear, oftentimes in the media, or even just in some of our interpersonal conversations, is sort of this, why now? Why is there such an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion now? And I don't want to suggest that there weren't folks who were already doing this work for quite some time. And I think that's an important point to point out, to make sure that we address. But I think it's also important for us to mention that there really has been sort of this uptick, and I don't know if it's just in public presentation of diversity, equity, inclusion, but even if we think about like the number of job postings that we see for, these positions now, that we see, I work in education, and we see like positions being created there, or task force and teams, all of these different levels. So what's going on? What is it that has made us say now is the time for us to sort of reaffirm our commitment to this area? Is there anyone in particular, or should I just, Brian, do you want to take a stab at that one?
I do, although there are two experts on this as well. Aisha, you do this professionally. What over the last couple of years have you must have seen the uptick that Keisha is talking about. I feel like we all have, and it feels like it's gone from that performative early check the box kind of just get it right because your customer wants it right, or at least they were told you, to a significantly more substantive approach to really understanding, maybe having a better understanding. What do you think is going on?
Way to put me on spot, Representative Sims. No, but I agree with that. And I think even after last year's incidents that we have seen, there is a difference of like being authentic and really, making this as a movement and creating the sustainable changes versus having those performative actions. So racial inequalities and disparities is nothing new to our country and who we are, right? Well, sometimes I hear about that, okay, it's slavery ended years ago, and, what are you talking about? And there is no, redlining or anything like that. But we have to understand, like last year's event, it wasn't something that it didn't occur before, but it really elevated and made us all aware of how important it is and how real that is. And when we look at in our history, and we look at 246 years of slavery, 89 years of segregation, a decade of movement for civil rights, and 55 years and counting for the fight for equal rights. Those 400 plus years of racism and all the isms and racial disparities, it's not gonna take overnight fix. So it's really gonna take that collective effort for us to move the needle. And I think right now our communities and our people, they're really acknowledging that. And some leaders are acknowledging it too. And I also feel like some are feeling that pressure, because now if you look at your businesses or your customers, now there is a demand for them too. So, many of the leaders are thinking, oh, if I don't issue a statement, or if I don't take a stand, there's going to be that, negativity coming across, because now there is a demand from the customers and for the communities and from your constituents that, hey, why are you not speaking up? Like, you cannot be silent and be complicit in that. So I think that has put a lot of pressure on some of the leadership too. But at the end, really glad to see this come to the light. And it's being recognized that we need to work together towards creating a more sustainable and equitable future, and recognizing the wrongs we did in the past, and what we can do in the future.
Barbara, both you and Keisha really tuned right in the moment that Aisha started talking about that kind of pressure that everybody's feeling. You served for years on as a council person when a lot of the early diversity efforts were just the check the box efforts, and now are in a lot of senior positions as this is starting to change, and you're sort of seeing that pressure up front day to day. I'm guessing you do.
Well, I just want to add I have two comments. The first is I'm probably the oldest person on this panel. And so I've gotten to see this come full circle, because I remember starting in the workplace in the 80s. And I think corporations were employers were under pressure then. I think it was behind, something for taxes or some type of incentive for them to include more people of color in their upper positions and not just in labor force. And so I remember hearing an HR person say that if you got a Black woman, you had a twofer. Okay, so so I'm coming from that many years ago, and so but at the time you did what you needed to do to get to rise up in your career, and we put up with a lot more. But today, I think we've come full circle where we have so many more people in positions of power within corporations who are speaking up and who are not afraid to speak up. And so I love the momentum of young people. So we have that going on for people of color. And then we also have, if you're in retail or you're selling merchandise or you're producing a product that you want people to buy, you realize who your market is. And now we, people of color, know that they're a huge part of market and sales. And so the customer's not afraid to speak up and say, okay, you're wanting me to buy this from you, but A, none of the people in your commercials look like me, or B, none of the products will do anything to enhance my skin color or my hair texture, or I want to see people who look like me. Yes, I eat Cheerios. I remember the big controversy with the biracial couple. And then I think there was an LGBTQ couple. You know, people just, that was just, wow, and that wasn't too long ago. But people are saying, no, I want commercials, I want products, I want television, movies to represent what families look like today and what we look like. I want my children to be able to turn on the TV and see people that look like them. And so we've been, like you said, Aisha, we've been fighting this for hundreds of years. And I suspect we'll be fighting for hundreds of years more. But I think we're at a point right now where we have a momentum, especially from young people who are saying enough is enough, and they are starting this new revolution of, I'm going to participate, whether it's in local government, whether it's, have my children in schools, that's on the school boards, on the local level with city council. I think I was and even though we're talking 2011, I think I was only the second woman of color to be on council in all those years of Lancaster history. And, just starting my position here, I'm the first woman, the first person of color after 70 years of just white males in this position. So I think the representation's changing and people are speaking up, and you have more people in places that can influence the CEO, and they may even be the CEO, to say we have to change our image and how we project ourselves out to the world.
Keisha, one of the things that feels exactly right, and I feel like I see that in government to some extent, but to large part, what I think I've begun to see is that people have started to figure out that while the push for diversity was initially to diversify, get diverse people there, social science has made it very clear to us that the life experiences, the lived experiences, as Aisha called them, of marginalized people, build within people lots of competencies, lots of strengths, lots of skills. And it's really interesting. If you ask a person, and I ask a person who looks just like me, ask a white person, ask anybody, about some of, where some of their grit comes from, where some of their best decision-making power comes from. They're going to point to some hardship in their life. And so it should follow that people who have experienced marginalization, experienced hardship and learned and grown from it are really, really good at this. And so while the check the box mattered, what people are now seeing is that when they did that, what they got was people who have lots of competency, lots of skill. We call it social science for a reason and not social art. And it's because we can measure and track so much of this. And what the data tells us is if you want a small business to be successful, for example, right now in the United States, you better have first or second generation immigrants involved, and you better have women in leadership involved. And that's not because customers want to see those things reflected in the businesses that they do work with. That's also true. But what you need is people who have particular problem solving skills, people who are able to triage problems as they get closer and closer and closer, people who are able to look at a financial landscape for an entire community. And they say that people who have never had to overcome anything don't know how to overcome anything. And we see that in environments where everyone looks the same, almost regardless of what that is. But to be honest with you, when you see environments where everyone looks the same, it's because they always look like me. And what that does then, it excludes a massive amount of not just life experiences that are useful, but an approach to dealing with problems, an ability to solve issues that is very real and very, very trackable and identifiable. And we call it cute names because we talk about it in coded ways. We call it Black Girl Magic and trans excellence and wise Latinas and women's intuition and all these things, because we don't want to say, by the way, your life experience also makes you very good at a couple of things that happen to translate to leadership very well.
Excellent, excellent. Woo! Thank you all. This is a beautiful conversation. I'm having all sorts of thoughts were coming to mind as you all were talking. One thing in particular, just to piggyback on what you all were mentioning, and Brian in particular, what you just said about how dealing with adversity and different things can build certain strengths. I was just reading an article earlier today, and it was a social scientific study, and there were two researchers who looked at the exact same data. One of the researchers was a white male, the other researcher was an African-American male, and the data that they were looking at was an African-American community. And even though like the stats were the same, so the basic background information was the same, the way that the white researcher interpreted was that many of the things he viewed as a deficit, whereas when the Black researcher wrote up his summary, many of the things he viewed as resilience. And so that sort of speaks to what you just mentioned. They were looking at the same thing. The communities that they were working with they were experiencing some significant hardships, but the white researcher said, oh, wow, this isn't great. Let's figure out how we can make them more like mainstream whiteness in certain actions and behaviors. And then whereas the Black researcher said more of its resilience, and how do we hone this? Not necessarily just leave folks in this situation, but how do we hone this and then do many of the things that you all just mentioned. So then moving on sort of from that particular element, another thing that came to mind for me as you all were talking is that one of the things that I've noticed a lot over, the last year in particular, since, and I think, Aisha, when you mentioned the incident, or were you referring specifically to like the racial unrest and, a lot of the different social protests and things that were linked to George Floyd, or just things in general? I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding or misinterpreting where you were headed with that. Was I on target?
Yeah. So it's
okay.
like, after the death of George Floyd, and of course, layered with the pandemic and everything that we were seeing in the social, injustice and unrest.
Okay, so I was and I'm sure most of our audience knew that that's what you were referencing as well, but I wanted to make sure that I was pretty direct with that. But within that, I think one of the things that's really come out is that there is this real push to also move the needle where whiteness and heteronormative behaviors and mindsets no longer have to be central or sort of the standard or the rule in all areas. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't. If I happen to be white, then yeah, that is my standard. But if I happen to be Black, or if I'm Latina, or whatever I may be, for so long, folks weren't allowed to have their experience be central to the way that they experience life, the way that they function in the workplace, the way that they function in anything. And that seems to be something that there's been a lot of push in, and one of the areas where I definitely do find some encouragement, as we deal with many of these challenges. So with that said, then the next question that I wanted to ask links a little bit with when you have some colleagues or you're dealing with folks who still don't necessarily get it. So how do you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion with colleagues or constituents or folks just in general who still don't seem to understand the importance?
I'll jump in because I work with a bunch of people who don't think I'm a first-class citizen, who don't like any of us, right? One of the quick ways I find to advocate for diversity and inclusion is that the vast majority of people I'm having to do that to look just like me, right? The average person that we're talking about, but for the fact that I don't come from any money and that I am not heterosexual, I carry most of the privileges that I'm trying to ask other people to utilize for good rather than just benefit from inertly. And so one of the ways it turns out to get people who share the same privileges that you have, that need to think differently about those privileges, is to remind them that they are pretty powerful in doing it. I hear all the time from guys that are like, you know what, I'm not a sexist. What could I possibly do about it? Well, you benefit inherently from sexism, and you happen to be the person that is best qualified to combat a sexist, and that is another man. And so there's this almost this empowerment thing that has to happen. It kind of, sometimes it's annoying as all get out, because you're teaching a person with privileges to also use the power of their privileges. It's frustrating, but it can be really, really useful. And so, you know, teaching white people, I hear from white people all the time, I'm not a racist, but what can I do? Well, the thing that you can do is not just not be racist, is that you can actively talk to white people being racist about why it is wrong. Because unfortunately, their racist opinion is already going to discount the opinion of somebody of color who's directly explaining to them why their racism is so wrong. And so it's this weird calling that it is sort of incumbent upon, if you're going to get the benefits of a privilege because of a body you just woke up in that you had no control over, there are also some of some of the tasks, if you will, that come along with that, some of the responsibilities. And if you explain to people that they can have a leadership role in a way that is very important, it turns out that social science tells us people are more likely to do that. And so it's almost like teaching people that have power, that if they use their power for good, that good things can happen. And that sounds weird to do, but it's a lot of, again, a lot of people with male privilege, a lot of people with cisgender privilege, a lot of people with white privilege. Those are very powerful things. And it's not bad if you have them. It's bad if you're not using them.
Would anyone else like to add to that question?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't think that there is an easy answer to that. So I agree with the Representative Sims saying, like, so many times we have the privileges, and sometimes when we talk about that privilege, people get defensive that, oh no, I don't have a privilege, right? I face those difficulties as well. So just realizing that having a privilege is not a bad thing. It's how you utilize that. Right. And with different people, you can take different approach. So there is not one size fits all. And just having that understanding, because diversity and equity and inclusion is not something that you can push or enforce. This is something that you want to have to do it. And with some people, you can connect through hearts, sharing those stories and those experiences. And with some people, you can connect through head. Like right now, if you don't have that diverse culture, if you're not inclusive, you cannot survive. Whether you are, a state legislature, that your voter demographic is changing. So if you don't speak up, if you don't support your diverse constituents, they're not going to vote for you. And the diverse communities, they're also feeling that empowerment that, okay, if we are electing someone, that we're also going to demand for our rights to be heard and our voices to be included. On the other side, I feel like for this to really be that sustainable change, you need to connect with people. And one way to do is either through their experiences or exposures. So if they have not heard about those stories, if they have not had those experiences or heard those stories, it's really difficult to connect with them. So I think sharing those stories and experiences, that really makes a difference. And that's what I have seen really being impactful at the Giant company as well, and overall in the community as well, that it really makes a difference and move the hearts.
Thank you. Some other things that came to mind when you both were talking, and sort of expanding on Aisha's comment just now about, head versus heart, or head and heart. I sometimes, disclosure, struggle with the trying to appeal to the heart element, because I'm very much like, I feel like if people want to change, they're going to change. If they want to find out more information about certain things, they're going to do it. I think exposure is absolutely important, but I really appreciate your comment in talking about the balance between both of those things. So carrying on to expand on what you all were just mentioning, because you also talked about the need for diversity in all of these different environments, and how if you don't have diversity, you aren't likely to survive. Can each of you share a little bit with us in regards to describing the climate of diversity at your present, within your present position, and recognizing, the definition of diversity that we gave near the beginning is very inclusive, but talk to us a little bit about what does diversity look like in the various spaces, either that you're working in or that you operate in.
Well, so for our authority, we're very diverse. We have a diverse staff, mostly Latino, African American, and white. So we represent the community, Lancaster City, the community that we serve. But on the overall picture, I belong to the Pennsylvania Housing and Redevelopment Authority Consortium. That's very white. And we are starting a committee on diversity and inclusion because, like my predecessor, everybody was that, that white male who was in a position for many years. And so these people are starting to retire. And so we formed a committee that we want to look into how do we recruit people of color to come in and start to apply for these positions, want to apply for these positions that have been dominated by a certain race and gender for so long. Because it's not anything, and I'm not saying that to say it was wrong. I'm saying to say that that's just the way it was in most areas of business for many years. But we're at a point now, we have an opportunity where a lot of people are retiring. So what does that look like? And how do we market to younger people, people of color, to want to take these positions? So it's, while, within our organization here with a staff of 35, I continue to strive to make sure we stay diverse, but it's the overall look of public housing authorities across not just Pennsylvania, but I believe the United States. Now, in certain areas, you have more people of color, but in Pennsylvania, it's mostly white. And so what does that look like? And it's a hard conversation to start, and you have to be, like Aisha said, and I think Brian too, you have to meet people where they are and be open to have those conversations, and not in an offensive way, because a lot of people, it's not that they have that inherent racism or that inherent stereotype within them. They don't even know they have it. And it's not that they were trying to emanate that. So you have to have that individual conversation. You have to make people feel comfortable, because it's not going to be a pretty conversation. It's not pretty at all. There's nothing good about it. But how do you make people want to start that conversation? I've been saying for years that, when you see all the civil unrest that happened January 6th, that was something that was building up for many, many, many years. Because while Black people have, built this country on their backs and have been not given any of the privileges that come from being an American citizen in this country, whites deal with the guilt of it, and also the empowerment of it. They think that they're entitled to this. This is their country. This is their flag. This is their right. But we've been putting Band-Aids on something that was festering, and it's such in deep, like it's like going to the ER and you're bleeding out, but someone's saying, "Oh, we'll just give you a little gauze." We're beyond that. We are beyond that, and it is time to really have that serious conversation. Many conversations. It's going to take a lot of healing, but it's going to take healing on both sides. It's going to take healing of that white person to realize their privileges. And because I've had so many people say, "Well, you don't know how I grew up. I grew up poor. I made it." Yeah, but when you walk into the room, they see the individual. When I walk into the room, they see a Black person part of a group. Okay, the first thing they see is my skin color. Brian, you walk into the room, "Oh, there's Brian Sims. Let's see if, he probably has potential. Let's talking about this and that. Oh, well, there's Barbara Wilson. Oh, she's Black." Not even getting to know any of my assets or what I have to contribute. You just see skin color. So there's many layers to this. But one of the things we have to do is recognize where we are, recognize the institutions that have been put in place, recognize that if we both, the former councilman that got elected the same time as I did, white male, and I was on a Democratic administration. But when we would go places, just instinctively, that person would be introduced. I'd have to go up and forcibly, and I'm Barbara Wilson, city councilwoman, and so that's what goes on. That's what's going on. but I think we're at a good time when we have to start to peel back those layers, but we have to do it in a way that it's not going to be pretty, but we have to be, I'm just one of those people, I think you have to be gentle. Some people are playing records they don't even know that they had, you know? And that goes for on both sides. I mean, that works across the gamut. So within the LCHA, I think we're pretty diverse, although we have to make sure that when that person walks through the door for an application, that we're not putting them in the box of, oh, well, you are less than. And that doesn't matter what color you are. Just because you qualify for this, oh, you're less than. No, you don't know that person's circumstance. And if you really care, the mission is to give someone that foundation so we can help build them up to move on to bring someone else in, because you don't know what brought them to that situation, and you don't know, and by the grace of God, there go I, is my motto.
Thank you so much. Would Aisha or Brian, would you like to address that one as well?
Aisha, after you, please. And I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm one of those people that I don't necessarily believe in Bolshevik revolutions, but some institutions do need to be blown up and started from scratch. Our criminal justice system is one of them. I think our financial system is probably one of them. What we've learned from those things is that if we do them right, what we rebuild is significantly better. The desegregation of the military is a wonderful example of something that was better for having gone through those growing pains. But the false notion that there is something superior or supreme about whiteness has to be purged from American ideology in order for this country to be anything that it's been promised to be to all people. And we're on a verge. I mean, this is the second summer of civil rights, and we're on a verge of being able to do that. And if we, I think every one of us have worked in movements where we've learned that if we back off at the end when things are finally starting to feel good, we really do backslide. As Shirley Chisholm said, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And as Barney Frank said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And so, all of us know what it's like to be on the menu. And that's the idea, right? Is that you can't, to Barbara's point, you don't soft play white supremacy. Racism has, tough conversations are how that works, for sure. And we're all good at having tough conversations. Frankly, women are good at having tough conversations. People of color know how to have tough conversations. First and second generation immigrants know how to have tough conversations, probably in multiple languages, right? And so there's a lot of competence here. There's a lot of skill in doing this thing that people need to be done, but there's no way to do it other than to do it head on and do it aggressively, because if these things linger in 20 or 30 years, we will be going through the same devastation, just amplified then too.
I agree with that. And there were so many times when Barbara, you were speaking, or Representative Simpson, and I was like, yes, that though we have our different perspective and experiences, there were so many things that resonated with me. And in the words of Audre Lorde, that there is no thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live single issue lives. So to your point, and when you're talking about, we have heard so many times that about the diversity having a seat at the table, or, different codes, that inclusion is being invited to the dance floor. But it's not really a true inclusion, because that is that intentional act. Diversity is just a fact. So if you are being invited to the party and you don't own the music, if you have a seat at the table, but at the same time you're made feel that you are given that seat, it's not your table. Your voice is not as equal or valued as someone else. So you should be grateful that you even have a seat at the table, right? So for our company as well, and otherwise what I see in the community as well, with all my intersectional identities, we talk about some of that iceberg of diversity, the color of the skin and how they look like. We don't look underneath that iceberg, or different identities. Like for myself, there are women who face challenges. I face those too. But then I am on this intersection of being a woman of color. I'm on the intersection of being an immigrant. I'm on the intersection of being Asian American. I'm on the intersection of being a Muslim. And I face all those challenges and discrimination. And sometimes we just have those blanket statements, and we don't bother to really look underneath and how authentic we can be. And for our company as well, I'm proud of the steps that we have taken and how we are on that journey of diversity, equity, inclusion. But at the same time, we do realize that there's a lot of work that needs to be done till we are truly inclusive. One of our team promises is be you. And that is, Dr. Keisha, what you talked about earlier as well, bringing your authentic self to the table, to the work, and not like whitewash any of your identities, but just be yourself and bring your best talent and perspective. Because when we talk about diversity, there is that perspective and knowledge processing. And even like if I'm the only one who looks like me in the room, I will assimilate my leaders, how they look like, and even unintentionally, I start copying them, like how they're perceiving, how they're doing that, just an effort to fit in. And when we look at our struggles and the history, just look at the indigenous people and how we try to assimilate that. And right here in Central PA, we have that first Indian school where out of the good heart of Captain Henry, he was like, okay, kill the Indian and save the man. Just try to really wash their identities, how they look like, their names, in an effort to civilize them. So this is our history. But what we need to do is really confront that and realize that and just look at it from the equity perspective. Because equal opportunities do not always equate to equal outcomes. So we really need to look at that and think from the equity perspective and just make sure that we are doing the steps we need and we are holding ourselves accountable as well as our leaders accountable. So they are building that sustainable change that we need individually, on organizational level, as a nation, and on a societal level.
Thank you so much. A number of things that came to mind when you all were talking was that one of the things it seems that we should attempt to do more consistently is just normalize conversations. And so again, when I'm in the classroom space, one of the things that I do early on with new students or, like folks who are new to the institution or who are just new to my classroom space is I talk about all of my different identities. Yes, I am a Black woman. I'm more than likely the first Black professor that you've ever had. You might have one or two more before you finish. All of those, I discuss those things that are the elephant in the room. And I tell them that I don't want you to tell me that you're colorblind. I don't want you to tell me that you don't see that, I'm Black. Unless you really are, because that's a lie. And I think that that we've lived with a narrative for so long that being able to discuss things that are different, that do not align with whiteness and heteronormative actions, that we automatically become fearful or assume it's negative if we even acknowledge any of these other things. So even if I'm talking with colleagues who have young children and they might say, oh, well, my friend, said this about the little Black girl in our class. And I'm like, well, so what, was she a little Black girl? Like, yes, her skin is different. Like, go ahead and have the conversation. Like, our reactions are what then begin to make it problematic. Like, you telling your daughter to be quiet when she said the little girl next to her skin was different is what then taught your daughter that, oh my God, is this bad? Is this different? I shouldn't say this. I shouldn't do that. And so as you all were talking, the teacher in me just was kind of thinking about what are some of these everyday examples of things that we can do. But with that in mind, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Barbara.
I just add to that what you said and what Aisha said is that so even though I came into this diverse authority, this diverse company, they were used to a certain type of person. Mm-hmm. And so these people who were mostly of color were like, well, we're not used to this. How is she going to be? She's a woman and she's Black. And I recognized that from the start, like you said, Keisha. So I called a meeting right away within the first hour of my starting of my first day. And I said, I just want to start off by saying that if, you have any questions, I know I'm different from what you're used to. And they were like, oh, like, it's okay. I understand. And I want you to be able to talk to me. And yes, it's going to be different, but yes, it's still a business, and I'm going to run a business. That's what I'm here to do. So whatever stereotypes you think is going to, come about, I understand you might have those. And because they were used to, like you said, they conformed to what they thought they were supposed to, what the workplace was supposed to be for them under this particular type of person. And so now this just really threw everything off for people, and especially the middle-aged white males. And so for me, I always use my personal stories because I think we have much more in common than we don't have. So I try to use that, and that's how I made people comfortable. Giving, I love the Eagles. So we talked, I found out this one another, I love the Eagles. So that's how we bonded. Talking about grandchildren, we have these different things in common. Yes, I don't look like you. Yes, I'm a female, but let's look past this, or let's have the conversation. Yes, I know your first thing you see was this Black woman. So I really like that you say that, and I think more people should do that and be comfortable with it. We have to have these conversations if we really want to invoke the change we want to see in the society.
Keisha, what I was going to add is that inability to talk about it because it's uncomfortable is a complete cop-out from the majority, right? If you teach yourself that you're not allowed to talk about the thing that you're doing wrong, you get to perpetuate you doing it wrong. And so, it's funny, everybody else who has to deal with their race or their nationality or their ethnicity or their gender or their orientation every day, we're all experts in talking about it. We have to confront it when you all three of you have to confront multiple identities as you grab groceries, right? So the idea that someone who looks like my dad might have to confront it because that girl next to him was a little Black girl, right? You're not allowed to say, oh, we don't talk about such things. Well, you not talking about them allows you to perpetuate all these mistaken beliefs. And it's one of the easier things it turns out people can do statistically to combat all this stuff is to just not mince your words, not be shielded from substance by platitudes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. All right, so we do have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to jump over there and I'm going to try to go down through the questions that are in here. And so the first question that we have in the chat are, what are common mistakes people do when trying to build diversity, equity, and inclusion? Who should lead these initiatives in organizations? So that's eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Well, obviously, white, straight men. Totally kidding. I wasn't sure what's going on there, Representative Sim. But yeah, I think one of the mistakes I see is that we try to do it for diverse communities, not with them. So there is a saying that you might have heard, like, nothing about us without us. So I think we need to think about that, and especially when we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are doing it with those diverse and marginalized communities, and actually having them lead those initiatives. Because I have seen it so many times, whether it's like nonprofits in the board and in organization, that they want to do the right thing, but it's how they're doing that. And that does not mean, like, I also see many people of color put in a position or of that responsibility that they're held accountable, but so many times they are overworked, underappreciated, and underpaid. So they are a person of color, or they are from that marginalized community. At the same time, they're given the task, but not enough resources and empowerment to do the change. Or like in general as well, like you don't have to be actually in that position of D&I, just being the person of color, or like being in the grocery stores, someone can reach out to you and just ask those questions and just ask you to educate them on racism or how they can be better allies. Or so there is a lot of pressure put on people of color to fix these issues. But I would say empower people of color or Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized communities, and really help empower them to lead those initiatives and do the work with them.
Keisha, there was a gentleman who ran for office in Philadelphia years ago, a Puerto Rican scientist, who said, don't pretend to give a voice to the voiceless, give them a microphone. And, you know, all of us like to amplify messages. We all want to lift up the people around us and the voices that we think need to be lifted up. The ultimate lifting up of somebody else's voice is not repeating something they've said. It's holding them up, giving them your platform, offering whatever it is that you can so they can say it themselves. The first person narrative is still, in the human condition, the most powerful thing that we can do to change people's minds. And, you know, one of the most insidious things that happens in diversity is the same thing that happens with diversity education. We make all diverse communities and marginalized communities teach themselves about themselves. We also make marginalized communities not only have to be responsible for teaching the people marginalizing them what they're doing, but also combating what they're doing. It's the complicated spiral of marginalization, is not only having to deal with it, but also somehow being responsible for having to stop it and attack it and you know, be the tip of the spear, so to speak, all the time. But Aisha's point hits home very well, that there is a massive difference between telling people what they're supposed to do and showing them what they can do.
I remember even when, as we talked about, you know, the George Floyd incident, we talked about just the pandemic, just so many things that are going on, period. Even here with the Y, this is full disclosure. Like I've been the executive director. Stacy invited me to participate and do the community nows and a number of different things. And this is one of my, you know, favorite volunteer commitments. But even I had to just press pause for a while, you know. And I remember sending an email and saying, you know, I'm still committed to this work, but no, I can't do this right now. And so I think that goes back to Aisha's point that, yes, you want to make sure that you are creating space for marginalized groups to be empowered and for marginalized groups to be leading in these spaces. But we also don't want to make the assumption that every person wants to lead those discussions or conversations, or at a minimum is willing to pick up that weight to teach other folks. Because I know one of the narratives that I've heard over and over in all of the different spaces that I'm in is that folks have been doing this forever. And just because folks decided to get woke, you know, in 2020, now I'm supposed to be like, yay, dump all of this on my back. And hands down, I was not one of those people who was willing to do that. But I do think something that should be considered is there are so many people who are willing to do the work. And so sometimes when, you know, companies or organizational leaders say, oh, we don't have anyone, you know, internal who is interested or willing, or where do we find these folks? There are all sorts of consultants who, you know, who pride themselves in this, who are so deeply committed. And so I think that's another area, like be willing to put the money and as Aisha mentioned, the resources behind it. No, it's not just another committee that you tap and put some folks on. It's not just an additional responsibility that you give, you know, one or two of the employees there, that you are willing to make this a budget line item, just like you're willing to make everything else. And then, you know, then the work probably really will get done. So I think that's something when we talk about, you know, what are some common mistakes? Some common mistakes is that we also try to just put it as a tack on to so many of the other things that are going on, rather than, no, this is just as significant as many of the other things that organizations are dealing with. So is it a line item in your budget? So, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to add to that. When you were saying, I was snapping. I was like, yeah, Dr. Keisha. But I just wanted to add to that, like, you know, especially the Indigenous people and in the Black communities and people of color, they have been doing that free labor for years. And right now, though we are not calling it, still people of color, they're expected to do that free labor. Like, you're not paying them for their, you know, insight or their expertise. If you're just calling them, can I pick your brain? Or, you know, can you help me with that? In a way, they're still doing that free labor for you to fix those issues, pay them for their, you know, for their experiences and their talents, and then utilize that. So I see that, you know, so many times that people of color and the Black and brown people, their experiences taken for granted and just being asked as a favor, and so many times just in that effort and desire to just confront racism and create that inclusive culture, so many people, they say yes, but it is exhausting, and it takes that toll. And if you are a Black person, and if you are someone who's also crying and having that racial trauma, when you're seeing that video of George Floyd and other incidents, at the same time, you're put in a position when you have to educate other people, when you have to tell them what they need to do to fix the issue of racism, and just be entitled to ask for your opinion. And to your point, not even asking or reaching out if that person is willing, and if that person is in a position to be that vulnerable and to be open to that racial trauma, to just think about all those experiences and just trying to help you out.
Yeah, I had some friends reach out to me during that George Floyd incident. And I said, I can't talk to you right now. I can't be that person for you right now. It brought up so many things from so many years ago and then, I have brothers and my son and my grandson and my father and I said, I'm barely making it for myself. So I can't help you. And you don't understand what I'm going through. And these are my well-meaning white friends. And I said, no, I cannot have a conversation with you that you might read about. This is my life. Okay. And so I don't want to I get emotional, but yeah, you hit spot on. It's like and then you always, and then when people say, okay, you want to be on this committee, it gets exhausting. And then you have to say, no, I'm exhausted. This is every day of my life. You don't realize you get to walk away from this. I don't.
Keisha, you were nodding your head through every bit of that about the sort of the trauma and the tokenization at the exact same time, and how that's more than the sum of its parts. Does that sound really familiar to you? Absolutely.
And even just in trying to find the balance of when do you say, but I'm still going to keep pushing, or I'm still going, because someone has to do that. So I think everything that everyone has said is completely spot on. And there are those days where you're beyond exhausted, but you still say we need to continue to push because there's no other choice. Well, there's no other choice that I'm willing to make. There's always another choice. We do have another question in the chat that I want to make sure that we get to. And this one links with diversity within organizations again. So how do you diversify the power within your organizations to give more people an opportunity to make high-level decisions? So I don't know who wants to.
I'll go quickly because I work in a relatively small organization. For me, it's exposure. I learned years ago that if it's between a mentor and a sponsor, right? A mentor is someone that tells you you'd be great at all of these things, you should go do them, and a sponsor is the person that kind of drags you into the room with them. It turns out one of the biggest barriers to being involved in lots of places is just never physically being there, never seeing yourself there. And so one of the ways that I try to amplify those voices around me that I'm trying to lift up are to have them with me. If I have the benefit of being in a job where when I call meetings or when I need to have large scale stakeholder meetings, that I can oftentimes choose who's either in the room or have some say, certainly who's with me in the room. And so, I have a really great team. And if they've got great ideas, it doesn't hurt me as a leader for them to be explaining their ideas to the people I'm working with. It doesn't need to go through me as the funnel.
Thank you so much. Yes. Okay. So a couple other things that I want to make sure that we get to today, and also I'm being mindful of time. One of the executive actions that President Biden signed earlier this week included directing the Department of Housing and Urban Development to take steps necessary to redress racially discriminatory federal housing policies. And so, Ms. Barber, I'm going to put you on the spot and talk to us a little bit about what are your thoughts, working in this industry, what are your thoughts surrounding that?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to see it, and I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad he's making it a priority. And HUD is so diverse. So when people think HUD, they automatically think public housing, but HUD is involved in all types of housing, even the privatization of private sales and all of that. So we have to look at it in the broad spectrum. I'm hopeful to see what the new Secretary of HUD, Marsha Fudge, brings as her initiatives. I'm glad to see Susan Rice back as part of this, charging up this for President Biden. And I was hired 3 years ago with the prior administration. And like I said to someone earlier this week, you know, public housing marches on regardless of who's in office. Personal politics aside, we have to keep people housed. We have to keep things going. But I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. And I think one of the biggest things that I hope, and as a former elected official, and as Representative Sims can attest to, at the end of the day, let's get the work done of the people. I'm so sick of this bipartisan politics and playing to a base and playing to this, when I don't care if you're Black, white, Puerto Rican, gay, straight, we all have the same issues of going on. We have health and welfare. We have, you know, employment issues. It doesn't matter. We have these issues. We have these problems. It's time to solve them. We have this infrastructure bill that's been sitting out here for years, that if it was just passed would encompass so many things, would bring so many jobs, would solve so many problems. We have a health crisis. We have health disparity, and it doesn't just, that health disparity goes into these rural areas that nobody wants to talk about. Poor whites are in despair as well with the lack of hospitals and healthcare centers. You know, we have real life issues that affect everybody. And I just wish that people would stop, because we can do so much more together than what we're doing playing these stupid games. We have children in crisis, mental crisis. We have our residents, our conversation, we had a 2-hour almost conversation yesterday about our seniors and their mental health. People are tired of being the COVID fatigue. We have it, we see it. They don't need another food box. They don't need another mask. They need to get back to their social lives and be able to interact with each other. Some of these people don't have family outside of us. They need to be able to come back into our office, whether it's to complain or not. That's their, you know, that's how they socialize that way, and people are hurting. So I really wish that, you know, it's just sad what's happening in our country with this divisiveness and bipartisanship and playing to the base, and people, you know, you're here fighting for something that you're in lack of yourself. But I just don't get it. So I'm hopeful, and I know President Biden. I really am encouraged by everything that he's trying to do, and I'm so encouraged by him saying that I want to be the president for every person in America. Unfortunately, I think he's in for a long haul, and at the end of the day, people are going to start voting in people that are going to work across the aisle and do the work of the people. It's not, this is what it's about. It's not tweeting and getting on and catching somebody saying, doing this and doing that. You know, Pennsylvania legislature, oh my goodness. God bless you, because you're up against some forces that are trying to hold on. I mean, they're, you know, right now, man, they're trying to make
the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
Barbara, run for the House of Representatives.
So we have to stand up, and we have to have conversations like this, and we have to start holding people accountable. And I think we are, but man, I love everything that he's doing. I think that I love the VP and the president and Vice President Kamala Harris making history. I think they have a really progressive agenda. I think it's really well-meaning, and I really appreciate that they're putting public housing to the forefront. As you know, we're at billions in infrastructure needs, and Lancaster is no different. We're millions. We're managing and own buildings that were built in the 70s, who still have those same things in place as far as just for example, our elevators. They're from the beginning. They can't even get parts from them anymore. So, but the money that we get is not enough to sustain. We do a good job. Our guys do a great job. but we're getting to a point where we have such need for capital improvements. And so I hope that's addressed. And I hope they also address sustaining housing that is already in place. Let's bring that back. Let's reform that. Lancaster has some beautiful, beautiful homes. And so I don't want to tear them down. I'm about restoration. And so, you know, we have 95 scattered sites right now we're trying to work on. So I'm hoping that, you know, some real substantial change can come. And I think someone said, you know, you can veto and you know, the president can sign off, but we have to put laws in place to keep things in place, no matter who's in office going forward. So that's what I'm hoping for, but I don't know. But I really appreciate what's being put forth, and I'm reading through things. It'll be a while till it gets down to here to the grassroots level. But for what I'm seeing, we haven't been notified about any major changes, but what I'm seeing looks very hopeful.
Thank you. And you have a fan in the chat box. I don't know if you're following along, but it says Barbara for president.
Oh, thank you. No, I don't think so.
So the final area that I wanted to make sure that we could address as we, you know, prepare to get ready to wrap up for this evening, links with hiring practices. All right. And so we began this conversation, you know, in talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in, you know, a number of different workplace settings. And so Maisha, I'm going to start with you on this one. Let's talk a little bit about hiring practices. Sometimes you'll find organizations discussing hiring someone who is a good fit. But sometimes fit simply means more of the same or like-minded in areas that might actually benefit from, you know, there being some difference. And so what are some policies, procedures, you know, conversations, hiring practices, those sorts of things that need to be had or that we need to have around those types of issues or positions?
Thank you. So I think, first of all, we need to understand, like for the businesses as well, as I said earlier as well, that in order to not just thrive, but even survive, you need to be diverse. You need to be reflective of the communities that you're serving. And that's what we aspire to do as well at the Giant Company. And it has proven as well, like a Deloitte study that they issued almost a year ago, that organizations with inclusive culture, they're 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, 8 times more to produce better business results, and twice as likely to meet or exceed financial results. So the benefit is there. And when you look at, like, you know, so many times it was looked at from the perspective of gender diversity. And then the other study from the Harvard Business Review was workforce with gender diversity. They did better results, like 15%. But the workforce with racial and ethnic diversity combined as well, their results were 35% more productive. So just looking at all of this, and then there is a saying of that we recruit in our own image, and what you said, to fit in, right? So many times the person doesn't fit in, but then what is the culture of that organization? Who is setting those policies? Who is in the position of power? Who is recruiting? And there's so many layers to that, Dr. Keisha, that we say, okay, we don't have diverse talent, or we didn't get enough diverse applicants in the pool. But how are we reaching out to diverse communities? Are we reaching out to them, or are we reaching out to our specific group where we are posting those job positions? And I look at it like, even if you're looking at the grocery stores, if I need to see for like fruit section, I will go to that section. If I need to look for like ice cream or something, I will go to that section, right? We know that. So why can't we do it for the diverse talent? Just reach out to them and just expand our efforts. And it includes all that holistic approach, starting from the job posting. Is that, you know, sexist or racist? What language we are using? Is that something that it's presented in a way that women or like people of color, they're not even applying for that because they feel like that job position or that company is not for them? And what processes we have in the recruitment? Like people of color and the names who sounds ethnic, the calls they get for interview, is way less than the other like white traditional sounding names, right? And for the hiring perspective as well, their hiring rates are way more. So our hiring managers just confronting the biases too. And as Barbara has said earlier, it's not like the people who are racist. It's just like what you don't know, what you don't know, and just confronting our implicit bias that we don't even know about, and just making sure that it's not about hiring. It's how we are reaching out, attracting, recruiting, engaging, and then also developing and advancing that talent. So it doesn't just stay on that bottom level, but we are giving those opportunities. We are creating that culture of belonging, that we are also able to retain them. And when we talk about, okay, we hired so many diverse people, or we hired so many women, and they don't, they don't stay with us. So maybe they're the problem. They're not the problem. It's your culture. If they don't stay with your organization or company, that means you need to make the systemic change where they feel belong, and where they, they're able to give their 100% and able to contribute that.
Excellent points. Excellent points. So as we near our end for this evening, I always like to, provide an opportunity for final thoughts for our panelists. And so what do you want to leave us with? Like, what was left unsaid tonight? Or what do you want our communities to really understand about this particular issue?
I want you all to run for office.
Okay.
I don't bury the lead. I know what, I'm 10 years of doing this. I know that the answer to broken public policy is empathy, and not empathy on the surface level. It sounds nice. It's like very real world empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes when you're making decisions that are going to impact them as a customer, as a consumer, as a voter, as a parent, as an educator, whatever else that is. And the data tells us that in the United States, if you're looking for empathy, you start with women, you move on to people of color, you move on to first and second generation immigrants. The LGBTQ data is great, although white gay men tend to mess it up a little bit. But empathy is the root of good public policy. And that's trackable and traceable in lots of different ways. Again, it sounds high-minded to hear it say, but it's a very basic concept that if our decision makers are good at making decisions about lots of people because they understand that, then the decisions that they're going to make are better. There has never been a better time in American history for non-traditional candidates to finally maybe become the traditional candidates. Our state legislature right now has less women as a percentage in it than China's government and Afghanistan's government. There are only 3 out people in the entire legislature, and it's my friends Malcolm and Jess and I. Whereas that doesn't make sense in a state of 13 million people. The things that are missing in our government are the things that I see on this panel right now, and I hope that as you're all reminded of it, every one of you has looked at what's going on in the world in this last year and thought, I could do better than that. Well, you're right. And, that's what I want going forward. I want people to listen to that voice in their ear and know that they are right, that they can do this stuff better.
So much. Wonderful. Barbara?
Just hope that, well, first of all, race is a creation of man. That was a creation to put people in classes and start the caste system. So just we all have to realize that we're all humans and we have much more in common than not. The other thing is, I hope that corporations like Giant, Aisha brings a great perspective, and I hope they're listening to her, because this is not just making a statement because something happened or you want to support Black Lives Matter for a month or two. This is ongoing. This is the serious work that has to be done. And so I just hope that people, regardless if you say, it doesn't really affect me. Well, it does affect you, because see, if we don't all succeed, then no one succeeds. And until people start to realize that, and we start to really have those hard conversations that need to be had, and understanding each other. And it's like Brian said, it starts with the government. And so those statistics are horrible, but those are facts. And so people have to realize your vote matters. It counts. You have to get educated on who is running for office. You have to realize it's not just at the federal level. You just don't want to vote for the president. You have to vote at the local level. And you have to vote for people who are educating themselves to be open as well. Because you can't then, once you start to have people of color, that's only just people of color. Because we all make up this our community. So whether it's in business world, corporate world, whether you're in education, whether you're stay-at-home mom, whether it's in your church, whatever it is. Like my pastor used to always say, 11 o'clock is the most segregated hour on Sundays, most segregated hour in America. So just realize that we do have differences, but it's a human race. And until we realize that and work on it, and then work with those people that are different than us, we have to start to understand other cultures as well. We have America's becoming a people of a lot of different cultures, and we have to understand it as well, start to learn how to live together. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. All right. And Aisha.
And I agree with that. And I second like everything what you said, Barbara, and Representative Sims as well. And I would add to that, yeah, we really need to speak up, and we really need to play our part. And it's on each and every one of us to do our part. And I know that I don't have the same privilege as someone else, like a white straight male in the power position, but I still have some privilege being able-bodied, being in the position that I have in the organization, and I do not take for granted. Maybe being on the receiving end, I know what it feels like to be discriminated, and having that empathetic approach and that understanding really gives me that better understanding and appreciation of utilizing my passion for creating that change.
Yeah.
And I hope, like today, me included, that everyone who have joined us, they take one thing with them, one small thing that they can do better starting today. Mm-hmm. It's not that we are going to wake up tomorrow and racism will be gone. It's not going to be that discrimination will be gone. But we have to understand that prejudice, it is a learned behavior. And if we intentionally try to disrupt that, then we can unlearn those behaviors. But we have to model that by ourselves as well. And I'll just conclude that in the words of Maya Angelou, that do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. So let's all try and commit in doing better.
Right.
And thank you.
Right.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Right.
Oh, you all have made this an enjoyable panel. I like to talk, obviously, and I enjoy doing this for the why. But one of the things that I enjoy the most of doing this is being able to delve more deeply into so many different topics that I know are important, but hearing from the experts in each of these areas. So thank you all so much for tonight.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up this month's Community Now, I have two announcements. First, we'd like to thank Aisha and the Giant Company for being sponsors for our Center for Racial and Gender Equity. And the Center for Racial and Gender Equity is the part of the Y that puts on our Community Nows and a number of other wonderful programs. And so an additional program that we hope you all will jump online and register for is the Black Power Boot Camp that begins since February 1st to February 28th, and it's designed to encourage all of us to create dedicated time and space to build more effective social justice habits and improve our understanding of history. You see that Jasmine has included the link in the chat feature, so folks can go ahead and register for that. And so overall, again, we just want to thank everyone for participating and sharing with us in this time of learning and understanding and discussion. All of our Community Now discussions are posted on our website. And so please continue to walk alongside us as we have these essential conversations. So thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.